We are collecting around 300 data points coming in on each patient. Then they go to the doctor and they're shocked. My doctor can't understand it. The tumor's shrinking. You want to have people running a clinical trial that do not have skin in the game on the product. And they're saying CBD only is all that's needed because that's the medicine, because it's just not true. The whole plant is the medicine. When I saw what this medicine could do, my first reaction was I was angry that nobody had told me this, and I'd been fed a bunch of lies all these years.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to Simulation. I'm your host, Alan Sakian. We are still at the New West Summit, the world's leading cannabis tech conference. We are now sitting down with Mara Gordon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm really happy that I had the opportunity to introduce you as an MC, and then your panel, which is really interesting on CBDs. We're going to get to that. That's a very fascinating cannabinoid that we need to talk about and unpack more. So interesting. You were also teaching, we were walking with our friend Conrad, and you were teaching us about all of the important data that you've acquired on cannabis and on clinical trial, on efficacy, on like milligram dosage and all this kind of stuff. So important, especially for people that are, trying, what does 5 milligrams do for me? What does 10 do? What does 15 do? How do these things, what are the differences? So why don't you tell us about yourself and about all of that, data that we'll start there.
Okay, so I'm going to back just a little bit up to say, like what I told you on the way here, talking about how all this came to be. And when I first came to this industry, I was just horrified about 8 years ago about what the options were for products to be used by people who were not necessarily looking to use it to get high, but we're using it in order to think of it in terms of to alleviate some sort of a health issue or life problem, yes. Which is just a different approach to it. And so when I started looking at the products that were available and looking at the information associated with them, the engineer in me came out and said, well, I can do better. And I said, well, I'm going to focus on just solving the dosing conundrum, because once we solve that, we will then be able to get adoption of this from the medical community, from mainstream, and to eliminate some of the fear. So it was all about education and understanding what's in the medicine. As soon as there was lab testing available in the state of California, we were like customer number 2, standing in line to be doing lab testing. There are issues around that, and I've come to find that, we have to, make some modifications, on the confidence level on some of the data points. But the first thing I did was say, okay, what are the questions that we want to ask, that we want to find out about, so that we can learn where the patterns are? And I think of it in terms of anybody who's ever hung wallpaper, and I know it's a strange analogy, but if you've ever hung wallpaper, it might have a 5-inch repeat, it might be an 18-inch repeat, it may whatever. So where is it going to be where we're going to have enough information about a particular thing to know whether it's applicable? So one of the problems, for example, with a lot of the anecdotal data that's out there, I should say the anecdotal stories that are out there, is they're an N of 1. Yeah. There might be a million N's of 1, but each one of them is only that. There are some things that we can extrapolate through observational studies and asking certain questions, but they're not all consistently asking the right questions, whatever.
There's not only no one quite in the world like you, because you're unique and all your experiences led you to that point, but then also we have to quantify our experiences very logically as well as subjectively in order to be able to have it as raw data input into a database.
Exactly. So we are collecting around 300 data points coming in on each patient.
Per patient. Per patient.
Per patient.
Per use as well? No. Okay.
Per patient. No,
okay.
Per patient.
Okay.
So what we do is we've been setting up, for example, we're collecting all of the same information that you would be giving to any healthcare professional specialist. So if you think in terms of you blow out your knee and you need to go to a neurosurgeon, they're going to hand you a clipboard with 11 or 12 pages of questions, or they're going to email it to you or mail it or whatever. Because of HIPAA, they're probably going to send it in the post. And you're going to fill all that out, and then they're going to either have somebody sit and re-enter it in, or they're going to scan it and it's going to become a PDF, and it's non-digitized, and it's not really, cannot be then searched and quantified. Yes. So what I did was I built a platform where people can go online and answer these questions. Once that we have all of that information in there, we are then able to, based upon some algorithms that we've created and a bit of machine learning that's in there, look at people that have been having the same diagnosis, maybe the same age group, maybe the same demographic general area, and saying, what have they used, how has it worked, etc. Because what happens is one of these people, they come and they fill out all that questionnaire. We help set them up on based upon just scientific data around the endocannabinoid system, which cannabis which cannabinoids are going to activate those receptors, which terpenes have other health benefits, etc. And we'll help set them up on a particular formulation, and then help them to titrate to a point to which it is achieving the medical benefit or whatever it is their objective is. I think the key point is that we have each person who participates, they establish what the objective. For example, somebody comes to me with a stage 4 brain tumor. They may say, my objective is to kill the cancer. Mm-hmm. Another person with that same diagnosis might say, I just want to deal with the side effects of chemotherapy, or I just want to be comfortable until I die. And we respect them and honor them and meet them wherever they are, because it's their right, not ours. So that would go into the data, though. So let's say we set them up on 10 milligrams a day of THC and 20 milligrams of CBD. I'm just making this up out of nowhere.
Hopefully they know it's an option, though, if they're at least educated that it's an option, that they can potentially kill the brain tumor and live longer. Yeah.
Lo and behold, what ends up happening is it starts working. And, then they go to the doctor and they're shocked. My doctor can't understand it. The tumor's shrinking. They don't understand it. There's no reason why. And we're like, we know it works in a Petri dish. We know it works in mice models. We know that a lot of anecdotal around it, but, we still haven't done the clinical in the cancer. We're working on it, by the way. So once, let's say, this person is given their suggested starting titration to a certain point, we then will...
Of which cannabinoids?
I'm just pulling one out of the air. Yeah. I'm just saying, let's say somebody comes and they're saying they're having sleep issues. For example, we're doing actual clinical trials now, double-blind clinical trials down in Australia right now for sleep, for insomnia. So I'm going to go ahead and use it as an example. So let's say we're going to have them on a full spectrum medicine that has allows the person to comfortably titrate up to 10, 15 milligrams of THC with a full spectrum that includes things like myrcene and linalool and other things that have somnolent benefits as well within the plant. So we'll pick a profile like that. Cool. We then have a lab result associated with that exact medicine they're using. So when they then use it, we're able to then track the results of it tied to the profile of that particular medicine. Yeah. Each time they change their medicine, we're able to track, is this working a little more, is this working a little less, and all of that. And then they go to their doctor, and the doctor, most diseases have a measurement, whether that measurement is a scale of where they are on tumor growth in pediatrics, or where it is in adults, or if it's a pain scale. I mean, we've all seen the antiquated faces of all the way from the happy face to, the one that would rather be dead at a level 10, and this Likert. So they all have their scales. We also have them upload into our data things like their MRIs, their medical, their blood work, all of those things, so that we're able to look at not just how they feel, but whether at a metabolic level it's actually having the benefit that they're looking for. And then we're able to then repeat it over and over and over again. And then we're able to identify where the outliers, and for example, then we start establishing patterns. You get enough people, you start seeing the patterns. Back to the wallpaper example. Yeah. Where does it repeat? Where is this going on? For example,
I was going to ask you, what are you seeing?
I'll give you a couple of very good examples, especially in the medical space. We have found, after treating thousands of people over all of these years, that there is zero correlation between milligrams of cannabinoids and kilograms of weight. It does not apply in cannabis the way it does in pharmaceuticals. Where the first thing they ask is, how much do you weigh, whatever. It absolutely does not work.
Someone weighs 250, someone weighs 125 in terms of pounds, and then they're each given 20 milligrams. That's no... The effect are, if we actually measured the effect, then we would say it's the same across the weight?
We wouldn't say it's the same, but we wouldn't necessarily be able to equate it to the weight.
We couldn't, okay.
We couldn't say it's because of the weight.
It probably has a lot more to do with the neurochemistry, biochemistry, all this other stuff than it has to do with
weight. It has a lot to do with fat. It has to do with hydration, mood. It has to do with propensity for needing to be in control. It has to do with a lot of things. It has to do with the heavy user versus light user. Yes. All of these things. Yeah. One thing where we have recognized a pattern.
It's interesting, the weight.
Right. And especially since the first thing a doctor wants to do is figure out milligrams per kilogram, and it just doesn't work. I heard a doctor whose name I won't mention, who specializes in pediatric seizures, say, well, it's between 5 and 20 milligrams per kilo. And I'm like, do you have any idea what that range is? That's a meaningless range for a doctor to prescribe, to 5 to 20. It's absurd. It makes no sense whatsoever. Where we have seen patterns is in the data, is in the dose and the age. The younger the patient, the higher the dose. The older the patient, the younger the dose. So I may have
the dose, the older they are.
Yes. For example, I might have a child who's on 400 milligrams a day of THC, and they're going to school. Where they're able to titrate them. Oh, yeah.
That happens today?
That happens, yeah.
400 milligrams a day?
If they're a kid that's going through chemotherapy and has cancer and they're being treated because,
wow.
Yeah. And then you have somebody who has the exact same diagnosis, who's an elderly person, and they may be on 25 milligrams or 30 milligrams to achieve the same results.
Wow.
Yeah. Because we are actually trying to get somebody to a level of the health benefit without having them have to have it interfere with their life. You know, I'm on cannabis every single day of my life, and I'm a highly functional, highly effective human being out there, and I don't walk around feeling high because I take the amount that's necessary in order for me to achieve the medical benefit without having to feel altered. Now, and I take THC primarily.
And I want to stay on that for just a moment because I don't know how many people actually realize that is totally possible. A lot of people are trapped in a binary position, like either no cannabis or cannabis, and that means I'm completely altered state of consciousness. And so there is so much spectrum in between. You just described being able to have a bodily medicinal benefit, meanwhile being still the productive self in the day-to-day operations of what you want to achieve.
Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. If I choose to take more, I'm making a conscious choice, and then I'm moving into a different realm. Yes. But as far as the same way that I get up in the morning and I take my medicine for my asthma, I take my cannabis. And I'm able to function just fine. Now, if I'm having a particularly bad pain day, I might have to take a little bit more. If the pain is to a point where it's truly interfering with my ability to function, to think clearly, whatever, I may have to take it to the point where I'm feeling more of the psychoactivity. But if I was to replace that with an opioid, I would be the same thing. I would be to the point where I was nodding and doing all the things that somebody that's on a heavy opioid would be doing as well. So it's a much healthier option to get to that point. But when it's taken correctly, it doesn't have to make you feel like you're walking around stoned all the time.
Yes. So do we have another trend that you think is important to talk about as we move to CBD?
I think that it's important that we, the trend of mainstream products going into like the supermarkets, the Whole Foods, et cetera, that are all jumping on this cannabis bandwagon. I think that it's a very important trend, and I like it. I'm a little bit leery of the fact that it's making it more about the CBD and instead of the whole plant.
You actually gave us that statistic a little bit ago that was
70%. Yeah, about 70% of our patients would not be able to be treated without THC. Yeah. So it is a significant percentage of them. And there are about, like I said, there's about a third of the population that when they use CBD, they feel extremely sleepy. My husband, for example, takes 100 milligrams of CBD every night before he goes to bed. He does that because he has some health issues that it helps with. He used to be, he's a man of a certain age. He used to be on something for his prostate. Now he's been able to get off of all the pharmaceuticals using this, but he goes to sleep. If I take as little as, 5 milligrams of CBD, it makes me feel like I'm jumping out of my skin. I feel activated, I feel anxious, I feel uncomfortable, and so I don't tend to go towards the CBD products. Now, part of that's the entourage effect and what else is in there, but frankly, I would have no interest in an isolate, and I don't think the panel I just did, there were 5 people on there, and there was only one person who was all for isolate, and that's because, to him, a hammer is everything's a nail because that's what they sell. So I would take that with a grain of salt when that's somebody's product. Of course, that's what they're for. Yeah.
Now, oh man, I feel as though I still want to stay a tiny bit longer on as we started moving to CBD, but there's just so much fascination. Can you tell us you said 300 data points per patient
at the beginning.
At the beginning,
and then all the usage and the follow up and everything on everything that they use as well.
How does a clinical trial like the one happening in Australia, how do they link up with you for you to put all the data into your database and then be able to run the algorithms and machine learning?
So I'm not actually running the clinical trial. They are collecting the data here. That's being done by a third-party independent clinical trial. You want to have people running a clinical trial that do not have skin in the game on the product.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
That's very
biased. Yeah.
That's a very important point. Yeah. So what happened was I treated patients for years, or I didn't treat. I helped patients with medicine and this and that for years and years and years around sleep, and was able to look and see which combination of cannabinoids and terpenes and at what ratios and also at what dose levels of those or quantity of the cannabinoids, I should say, that they were able to use across, as an average, and then take that data and then go to Zelda Therapeutics, which is a biopharmaceutical company, which I just happen to have found also, that's out of Australia. And then through there, because it's public, it was able to raise the money needed to be able to do these level of trials. They then fund the clinical trial utilizing my formulations.
Interesting.
Yeah, and we filed patents and do all the things you have to do to, to make investors happy.
So then there is the data that you're taking about, let's say, my biometrics, and then you're also taking the cannabinoid that you're using, you're taking the milligram dosage, you're taking if there's added terpenes here. So then there's all that data.
Nothing added.
If there's any terpenes.
Right,
yes, there's any terpenes.
Everything is native to the plant, and it's a very, very important distinction, is that we only work with whole plant. Whole plant does not mean the roots and the stems and all that. Whole plant means that whatever the profile of the plant is what the profile of the final medicine, and not because we've added artificial to it. Would you like me to elaborate at all on that or not? Is that going too far down the rabbit hole?
Let's stay here with this point quick. So then the biometrics, then you have the cannabinoid that you've selected, the dosage, the milligram, the amount, and then there's more data that's being. This is all data that's kind of in in the soup of the
Right.
experience,
Yeah.
who that person is, all this kind of stuff. So, and then the other thing I wanted to mention was that then there's what you're targeting it for, what the person wants. Do they want to have their seizures end? What do they want with it? And then how efficient is what you're choosing as a cannabinoid? How efficient is it at solving that? And so that whole kind of like triangular process, that soup that you're making every time is now being quantified, and it's being measured, and it's being that way you can find these patterns, you can find these efficiencies.
Correct.
I love that. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for doing that.
Oh,
That's so important.
you're welcome. I feel honored, really. I had retired in 2003, and I never planned on working again. I didn't need to work again. I was done. And this was the kind of thing that when I saw this, and it was before this huge green rush. I mean, when I saw what this medicine could do, my first reaction was I was angry that nobody had told me this, and I'd been fed a bunch of lies all these years. But then the second thing was, someone's got to figure this out, and I'm smarter than the average bear, so I figured I might as well give it a shot. So I started figuring out, first thing we need to do is educate doctors and nurses about the endocannabinoid system. So I started a medical practice and started training doctors and nurses. And then I said, and we need to have well understood products that they can use and we understand. So I'm going to start making these things based upon the profile of the medicine. I'm going to have them lab tested so that I can know and verify what's actually in them. Then I can record what people are using, how many milligrams of each thing. And so I'm going to collect all that. Well, now I better build a platform for all this data to go into. Yes. And so then I ended up with the software. And then it was like, okay, I'm doing all this. So now I'm going to validate it with clinical trials. So I'm going to go create this company. And then I started seeing the latest trends that are going on in the industry with this mass-produced, white-labeled product that's pretty low on the totem pole as far as quality in many cases. And you ask the average person in this space what their background is, and most of them have a marketing degree. And those are the products that are getting all the shelf space are being manufactured by companies that come from the let's get the largest market share we can in this space and tell a good story and have pretty package. And I was like, that's great. You keep doing that, but please at least put something nice inside of it. And so we're the Intel in the laptop, Yeah. So we basically, so I said, I'm going to start a company, and I call it the oil plant, which makes perfect sense because we make oil. And we make it and we put it into the Anzeldes products, or we make the Anzeldes products at the oil plant, but we're also making other people's products, and we're also now providing oil to go into other people's products, either through extraction or infusion.
Okay, and
so I feel like I've kind of covered, and now,
yeah.
And now doing the merger in with the oil plant with Gabriella's Kitchen. So now we're doing the full spectrum for better for you foods that have no infusion, all the way through infused products to the really serious medicinal type products.
And this is again on a big spectrum of dosages, of very small amounts to
everything from nothing to microdosing to macro.
Yeah. That's great.
You have to look at the biphasic effect also, because something that works at a low level, it doesn't work here, and then it works here, and then you say, oh, I'm going to take a little bit more, it can go back down and not work anymore. So cannabis, the cannabinoids in particular, you have to be really careful of that. And then one last point on that is on the whole plant versus the single molecule. When people use a whole spectrum,
Sorry, is the biphasic true for everybody?
Yes, that's just the way the plant works. Yeah, which is why people will smoke themselves sober. You're around somebody who's been smoking pot all day, they're not high. They don't feel high anymore. They don't feel that psychoactivity. If they they felt higher on one hit than they're going to feel on sitting and passing a bong around all day. Yeah, so, yeah. Big difference.
One can become used to the effect over a long period of time.
That's also is the other thing is you can get to where you need to do some sort of a 48-hour flush to basically to reset your endocannabinoid system. Otherwise,
It's good to
your
go a
dose
whole
gets
month of being sober, because then you're like,
Yeah.
you can reset an even
Right.
larger scale. Yeah.
right. We actually, after 48 hours, it's just psychological that it's a bigger reset. Yeah.
And that's always fun, though, to set conscientious agreements with yourself to
I
to
was
follow
talking
through.
to somebody from ArcView who's doing, a sober October or whatever they call it. Yeah. It's like, no, thank you. I get up, take my medicine. It's like I'm going to say, oh, no, I'm not going to take my asthma medicine today because it's October. I mean, to me, it's medicine. So,
Yeah. But for people that are just trying to do it as a challenge to themselves and that kind of stuff. Now, okay, speak to us a little more on the CBD side of things. Okay, where are we in terms of understanding? You were saying earlier, 70% of the cases, again, that are using they're using cannabinoids that are not CBD. Is that what you said?
Not quite. What I said was 70% of the people that we work with would not be able to be treated without the presence of THC.
Okay, got it. Okay, so 70% of the people you treat.
THCA, it's also CBG, it's also all the other cannabinoids, full spectrum. But you can't take CBD out alone. Like for me, I have chronic insomnia.
70% of the people you treat you're using a THC cannabinoid in there.
They're also using, or they may only be using, or also using. Right. So the point is that you can't just eliminate the THC because it's not the medicine and just use the CBD because you're not going to be able to treat most of these things. For example, if somebody has a tumor and you're trying to target the CB1 receptors, okay, to kill the cannabinoids in the central nervous system or something, you can target that with THC quite effectively and quite simply. CBD works, has a milder affinity, and it's not going to work quite as well. It's going to work differently. So you can accomplish with certain diseases some of the same things, but you're not going to have the same benefit or the same rate or anything else. If you have somebody who's has anxiety, it might be that a very small micro dose of CBD might be exactly what they need, but it also might not be what they need, and they need the THC to do it. So it's unfair to people to say CBD or nothing. And I have such a big problem with these states and advocates in our supposed industry who've gone around for self-serving purposes and are saying CBD only is all that's needed because that's the medicine, because it's just not true.
Good. I'm glad you're speaking that truth.
The whole plant is the medicine. Yeah.
Glad you're saying that. Yeah. Okay. What else should we be aware of regarding CBD before we jump into future of cannabinoids?
I think it's important that when you're identifying a CBD product that you need to look at things like where was the hemp or the cannabis. I know that they're the same. So when I say hemp, I'm talking legal farm bill hemp versus cannabis going through controlled, regulated markets. So I'm using the terms that way. You need to know how they were grown, whether they were tested for all of the microbials, aflatoxins, mycotoxins, all those things, heavy metals, pesticides, down to very, very fine levels to make sure they're not in air. It's an accumulator plant, so you want to make sure that something that was used to clean the soil after a nuclear dump isn't then used to extract CBD to treat your mother. So you need to make sure you know the source and the life cycle and that it's been tested. It's also important that there is that entourage effect because, this is an example I've given many, many times when I give a presentation. In fact, Is
the entourage effect as though the rich get richer type thing?
No, entourage effect in the sense that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So, for example, I use an example when I give presentations quite frequently where I'll say, okay, I want to make a chocolate cake. So I get out the flour and the butter and the sugar and the eggs and the vanilla and all these, various ingredients, and I put them on the counter. If I eat them one by one, yes, I've technically eaten the stuff that makes a chocolate cake, but I have not had the experience of eating a chocolate cake.
So it'd be like if you went to a table that had 8 powerful people sitting at it, and you went and just talked to each one of them outside of the room, versus you actually were sitting at the table with them, listening to how they all converse and about what they converse. Maybe something like that.
I would say, I don't know, that's a tough one. That one I'm going to have to say, No.
The chocolate cake one was good, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say it's more along the lines of if you take blue and you take red and you mix them together, you get purple. But you can sit blue and red next to each other, and they're not going to be purple.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think that's probably a better way to look at Entourage.
I was trying to think about it with like a relatable example with network theory, like of people talking to each other.
Right. So I think it has more to do with the fact that it's about the combining of the fact that, like I said, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So it's not 1 + 1 is 2. It's 1 + 1 might be 4. Yeah.
So okay, so now. Dive us into some of the aspects on the future of cannabis that you think are just really important to communicate.
Right. I think that it's very important. What's happening right now is you have this consolidation of brands in groupings. I'm doing it myself. I'm as guilty of it as everything else. But what I'm doing is I'm identifying companies that have a similar ethos, that have a similar approach, that fits somewhere along that lifeline from healthy foods to serious medicines and everything in between, for anything that goes in or on your body, of being of a level of quality and caring and science behind it, versus going to quick to market, hurry up, get as much market share as you can, and worry about the product, the quality of it later. I had a discussion with Steve Berg, who's I think he's the CEO of Firefly. I had a discussion with him at a yoga retreat about it a little over a year ago, and he said that it's like the Ralph Lauren model. He said Ralph Lauren was always a very exclusive brand. It was like you had to go to the Ralph Lauren store, or you went to Neiman's or Nordstrom's and went to the Ralph Lauren department, and it was a big deal. And then they came out with their Chaps line, and they were in Kohl's and everything. Well, what happened was a rapper was wearing, and I don't know who it was wearing, it was probably Kanye or something, wearing a Ralph Lauren polo shirt or something in one of his videos, and all of a sudden mainstream started clamoring around for Ralph Lauren. So they came out with the lower priced line and went out and went everywhere. Well, what happened is they angered their exclusive customers.
Oh, interesting.
Right, who were like, wait a minute, I went from saying, oh, it's Ralph Lauren, and people going, ooh, to now you say Ralph Lauren, and it's like, big deal. And so the fickleness of the mass market that, today it's Ralph Lauren, tomorrow it's Nike or whatever, they came and went, and then they lost that big market of the other. Yeah. So that's a decision a company makes on how they're going to exist as a company in the marketplace.
And that's a huge point, because we have had so many discussions now about the way to enter into markets. Who are your demographics that you would like to engage with you in your product or service that you're trying to bring to the world? Right. It's important to be very careful with understanding what that market is and what the long-term vision might be with maybe entering secondary markets.
Exactly. And understanding whether you're going to come in this for the long haul or the short money and get out. Yeah. So you have to figure out where you want to play in this space completely to, legitimately have your place in it. So, I made the decision early on that I cared about quality and longevity. So I took an R&D approach. I cared more about having deep knowledge and excellence in manufacturing. And then when the market started to turn, like now, I'm ready, because I've got all that data. I've got all that research. I know what to put out there. So I don't have to create a big, giant storm of marketing material around it, because I know where to go. I know where to meet the consumer because I'm already there. So I think it puts us at a bit of an advantage. I'm not a marketing or finance or business person particularly. I'm becoming more. My whole vocabulary has shifted because of this. Some of the questions that I'm asked, I have no idea what they're even talking about. But then again, let's start talking endocannabinoid system. They don't know what I'm talking about. So it means, yeah. But I think it's really important that that we look into who the people are and what their ethos and why they're in this and what they're doing, and the companies that are coming together need to come together with that common thing, because all of them will be raised together in a much better way. You don't want to have one that's lopsided or one that's going to bring everybody down. So you have to be very, very careful in who you associate with right now. But
I like how you're pushing ethics as ethos as a main pillar of what you're discussing
100%,
right now.
100%. I mean, I operate in a federally illegal business, if you ever see Weed the People, the Abby Epstein, Ricky Lake film, it's following me and several of my pediatric cancer patients for about 5.5 years. Talk about putting myself at the forefront of being specialized in giving a Schedule I drug to babies. Yeah. So if I didn't have a high level of importance that I put on values and quality and ethos, then I would be not only in danger of legal ramifications, but more importantly, what I'd be doing to the danger to other people's lives. And there's a responsibility for those of us that are in this space now not to go to Facebook for medical advice, not to go to Amazon or Etsy to buy our CBD, but to actually treat this as an important drug and medicine and food source, and not just a commodity to be pushed as much as we can out into the market so you can make a bunch of money and take off. Yeah.
I really appreciate your perspective on all of that. We talk a lot about ethics on the show. We talk a lot about the future of humanity. We talk a lot about the trajectory of civilization. And it takes a long time and a lot of experts congregating that want to benevolently have powerful discussion around ideas that can help get to the public and keep people safe and inspired and all that kind of stuff along the way. And reduce suffering, all this amazing stuff. So any last thoughts on the way out?
I guess the panel I just did was way out of my comfort zone, but interesting. It was all a bunch of hemp people. It was like, why am I here? But it was interesting. I think that the last thing is that there are a lot of studies that are being done. A lot of studies that are being done right now, for example, in Israel, everybody points to, are being done on the single molecule of pharmaceutical model. That is not the model that we want to go. I am absolutely not in favor. I mean, there's exceptions. There's people like David Mieri, who's doing full spectrum analysis over at Technion. But
Can we have both, like both individual molecule, like isolation, but then also combining as well and analyzing the results from that?
We can do it in the Petri dishes and things like that in order to just find mechanisms of action and what's working, et cetera. But I feel like it's irresponsible, the same way Durabinol or Marinol is irresponsible to have that be a drug when it's such an inferior product to using THC derived and encased within the whole plant.
So single molecule is inferior compared to multi-molecule.
Absolutely. In fact, the study that we just did that was published a few months back on the 3 major subtypes of breast cancer was comparing the pure compound to the whole plant. And we even went so far is in the second phase of the study, we looked at taking the top 5 terpenes that were in the whole plant and adding that to the pure compound to see if that worked, and it didn't work any better. So whole plant, there's something in there, some things in there that when they're in combination in the right ratios, they just work better. And I really want people to understand that this needs to stay in the biopharmaceutical space and not get pushed over into pharma, because it'll be an inferior product. So instead of saying, well, that's the only way people will get it, change the way people get it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Instead of settling for second best.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the real innovation and the real creativity right there, is to come up with completely new off-path ways of moving forward. I love that. Awesome. What a pleasure this has been. Thank you so much for coming on to the show. This has been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
So disciplined across, data, across reducing suffering, helping people. CBD has just been really interesting learning from you. Thank you for coming on the show. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Also, make sure to go create, go build, go manifest your destiny. And thank you, and we'll see you soon. Bye.